Pro Football Hall of Fame and its selection committee announced the NFL All-Decade teams about 2 weeks ago now. And I found that the offensive team was, I would agree with for the most part. The most interesting thing, though, was that none of the receivers and none of the tight ends were unanimous, which is somewhat surprising to me, even though Calvin Johnson retired maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. Actually, probably 3 or 4 years ago now. It's been a while, but I mean, Megatron. He broke some of Jerry Rice's records in terms of, I believe, most receiving yards in a season, as well as, I believe, some of the touchdown records. The guy ran a 4.31. He's 6'6", and he's over 220 pounds. I mean, he's a tank. He's a tank. He's speedy. He's one of the best NFL receivers of all time. So, I mean, for him not to be unanimous was a little bit of a surprise for sure. And some of the other picks as well. I mean, Rob Gronkowski. What more do you want a guy to do? I mean, he had some injuries, but without him, Tom Brady is looking at least 1 or 2 less Super Bowls because, at times they didn't really have a number one target. They had Randy Moss for a little bit, but he wasn't able to win a Super Bowl with the Patriots. They had Aaron Hernandez and Gronk, which might be the best 1-2 punch of tight ends of all time. They had Edelman and they had Amendola, but I don't know if any of those players played as well as Gronk when he was at his best. So I found that one kind of interesting. But I really like the offensive team that the selection committee came out with. Now on to the defensive team. That was a little bit more questionable for me. I found a lot of gaps in between the picks. One guy who didn't make it was Terrell Suggs. And, Terrell Suggs started his career, I believe, in 2004 or 2005. Terrell Suggs is still playing, not to mention he's a second-time Super Bowl champ now with the Kansas City Chiefs as he signed there towards the end of the season or past the midway point. Terrell Suggs has been a monster at outside linebacker. He's played the end in his career, defensive end in his career, and for me, I just found that he had to be on there. The defensive ends that they came out with were Calais Campbell, J.J. Watt, Calais Campbell, Cameron Jordan, Julius Peppers, and J.J. Watt. And I really, all of those defensive ends are great football players. J.J. Watt was unanimous. That doesn't come as a surprise to anybody. I believe he is second or third among active NFL sack leaders. I believe J.J. Watt is at the top of that list. Another man who's at the top of that list is Chandler Jones. Now, here's the interesting thing, is that Chandler Jones, when he was on the Patriots, he was primarily lining up and playing defensive end. And I believe he has more seasons playing defensive end than outside linebacker. So kind of interesting for him to be selected as a linebacker. And I kind of wish that they would have selected him as a DN because there were a few good linebackers that were left off this list. Terrell Suggs was the first one that I named. Number 2 is Clay Matthews. Clay Matthews is among the top tackles leaders in the NFL that are current tackles leaders over his career, and he's had multiple seasons where, or at least one season where he's led the NFL in tackles, I believe, and I know definitely among linebackers, he was up there. So for him not to be on that list was a little bit interesting, because I think at least 1 or 2 years, aside from Von Miller, you can make a very strong case that he was the next best linebacker, and aside from Terrell Suggs. But the inside linebackers, I thought they did a really good job of, not unanimous, but Luke Kuechly, Patrick Willis, and Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner is a force. He was part of those great Seattle defenses, which made it to the Super Bowl. So it's very hard not to put him on there. He made some big time plays, especially in the Super Bowl with his interception. I forget which year that was, but I believe it was the Super Bowl against the Patriots. I could be wrong if it was against the Broncos, but he's a big time player, no doubt about that. So outside linebackers, they had Khalil Mack, Von Miller, and Chandler Jones. So like I said, I would have moved Chandler Jones to defensive end, and I would have slotted in Terrell Suggs, and then I found it interesting. Calais Campbell is one of the defensive ends on this list, and I believe amongst the 4 defensive ends, Julius Peppers, Cameron Jordan, J.J. Watt, he's last in career sacks. Now, he hasn't had as long of a career as some of those other guys, but there's a lot of current current defensive ends and defensive tackles that are ahead of him in terms of those that are the current sack leaders. So I found it kind of interesting to see him on that list. Moving on to the players in the secondary. At corner, you have Patrick Peterson, Arizona Cardinals. The guy was a complete athlete. He was a great punt returner. Tough to never see him. I don't believe he got a Super Bowl ring. So that's kind of one of those very, very elite players that you want to see get a ring. After that, yeah, Darrelle Revis. Revis Island. Before Sherman started coming up, Revis was definitely the best corner in the NFL. Once Sherman came in, it was always the talk, who's the better corner, and then you get to see it in the Super Bowl when the Seahawks played the Patriots. So that was obviously great to see, but obviously all those players, I think nobody's going to argue that there was another corner that was better than any of those 3 guys. Interesting though, again, none of them were unanimous. On to safeties. This was probably the most interesting in terms of whether it was the special teams, the defense, or the offensive all-decade team. They chose Eric Berry, Earl Thomas, and Eric Waddell. Earl Thomas, there's no argument, he's got to be on that list. One of the big glaring holes that is not on this list is nicknamed Bam Bam, Cam Chancellor. Cam Chancellor was almost the heart and soul. Basically what Richard Sherman said is he was one of the best, if not one of the best players on that defense. That's coming from Richard Sherman, who, in my opinion, was the best player on that Seahawks defense. But he said, "Hey, Cam is he's the heart to our defense," and I think that says a lot considering Bobby Wagner's on this list, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas. There are a lot of good players. I mean, their linebacking corps, Bruce Irvin, who ended up going to Oakland. He's another key player to that defense. And, they had great corners too. Lane, Maxwell, who ended up signing, I believe, after with the Eagles. So they had a full defense. But I think that, Harrison Smith is also one of those players too that, for the Minnesota Vikings, many argue that he might be one of the best tacklers in the NFL, and not too many people would argue that in the last decade, aside from Cam Chancellor, who among safeties was probably the best tackler, that Harrison Smith would not be number 2 on that list. I mean, if you don't believe me, feel free to go on YouTube and watch him play safety. There's a highlight tape with him and Anthony Harris, who is another great safety that's just kind of creeping up into the league right now. I believe he just finished his 2nd or 3rd year in the NFL for the Vikings, and I'm a big Minnesota Vikings fan, for those who don't know. But Anthony Harris is great, but Harrison Smith, I mean, he's been selected, I believe, 5 straight years now to the Pro Bowl team. The guy is a beast. He's a ball hawk. He's got great hands. He can return it too when he gets it. So he's been a great player for the Vikings, and for him not to be on this list, no disrespect to Eric Berry. Eric Berry is a great football player, and unfortunately, he had to deal with cancer during his career. And had he not had cancer, I mean, he probably would have been without a doubt on this list. It's very tough to say, though. It's tough when somebody misses time in their career due to an injury, personal matters, things like that. There's many football players, many pro athletes. Like, if Aaron Hernandez wasn't involved in criminal activity, I think we would be talking about him being one of the greatest tight ends of all time, up there with the likes of Tony Gonzalez and Rob Gronkowski. There's not too much of an argument to say that guy wouldn't be up there. So, yeah. Another question mark that some people had mentioned to me were Eric Weddle. Now, Eric Weddle, over the past 10 years, is among the leaders of active NFL tackles. So, there's a strong argument to be made there. But I would personally probably put Cam Chancellor and Harrison Smith and take Eric Berry and Eric Weddle's spot. Now, the NFL also, or the selection committee, also put 2 spots for defensive backs. And the 2 players that they selected were Chris Harris and Tyrann Mathieu. Chris Harris is one of those great stories of a player that, undrafted player, and is now one of the best corners in the NFL, probably top 5 at the moment. I don't think too many people would argue with that. Certainly top 10. And he's been a great player for the Denver Broncos, and I think that he's probably going to be on this list, but many people forget about his teammate. Also played for the Patriots, played for the Buccaneers, a man by the name of Aqib Talib. Tied among current interception leaders in the NFL with Richard Sherman at 35. He's a ball hawk. Many people have also given him the nickname of Debo, for those who have seen the movie Friday with Chris Tucker and Ice Cube. There's a character named Debo, and Debo wreaks havoc on the neighborhood and steals bikes and steals jewelry from Ice Cube and Chris Tucker in the movie. And that's basically what Aqib Talib is. He snatched Michael Crabtree's chain twice, I believe, and he's not afraid to tussle with you. He's a physical football player, and I mean he's one of those guys where it would be hard to leave him off this list, because I think in terms of cornerbacks, aside from the 3 that got on this team, he's number 4, and Chris Harris might probably be number 5 on this list. But anyways, the last player that was on this defensive team, the second one of 2 defensive backs that was chosen with Chris Harris was Tyrann Mathieu. And Tyrann Mathieu is a great player. Nobody's going to question that. When he was with the Arizona Cardinals, when he started off his career after he got drafted out of LSU, many people thought Tyrann Mathieu was going to be the best safety in the NFL. I don't think he ever got really to that status. I mean, he's probably a top 5 safety right now, and at points in his career he definitely was. But I don't know if he had some injury trouble in the past, and I think that he's definitely among the top safeties, but just in terms of legacy, in terms of interceptions, in terms of tackles, and just play, and just his level of play, I would still have to put Harrison Smith, and I would still have to put Cam Chancellor over him. But Tyrann Mathieu would be, in terms of my honorable mentions, and Chris Harris, those guys would be right there. So I think they did a pretty good job with the offense. I think there were some holes in the defense for them to kind of fix. But this is what it is, right? Not everybody's going to agree on the NBA MVP. Not everybody's going to agree on these lists. Just a matter of opinion. Tell me what you think in the comments, because I'm really interested to know what people think about my opinions. I'm not always going to be right, but I've been watching football for a long time, and these are the things that I believe, and based on some of the statistics that I've read, that's how I feel. On to the special teams, all-decade team. Now this one was interesting too. There was no doubt that Devin Hester was going to be on here. But strangely, and I understand Devin Hester had some extremely flashy kick returns for touchdowns. And I understand that kind of, he was very famous for his kick returns, but as a punt returner, I believe he is in all-time punt returns. He's number 1 in the NFL, and I believe he leads number 2 by 4 or 5. He's not the leader in kick returns among NFL players all time. So I found it kind of strange that they would put him in the kick returner slot. Now, here's the other thing. I understand later in his career, I'm pretty sure he was on kick return a bunch more than punt returns, but that could also be wrong. That's just what I remember from when I watched games. But just based off of the numbers, it just seems right to put him as a punt returner. So I would have selected him as a punt returner. The 2 punt returners that they did select were Tyreek Hill and Darren Sproles. Now I believe Tyreek Hill's in his 4th or 5th year in the league. He's the best punt returner in the league right now. I don't know if it would be fair. Like I said, I would put Devin Hester number 1, and number 2 would either be Darren Sproles. Tyreek Hill would be in the conversation. After that, he would be an honorable mention. But I would probably have to go with Darren Sproles or Deshaun Jackson. Those 2 guys, I mean, Deshaun Jackson, before he came to the NFL, when he was at UCal, I mean, his punt returns are crazy. He's a beast. And he obviously has one of the most famous punt returns of all time. In the dying seconds of the game against the New York Giants, all they have to do is punt it out of bounds. And Tom Coughlin was very mad. The punter punted it right to Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson said, "You know what? I'm one of the greatest punt returners of all time. I'm going to show you what I can do." And then, he kind of weaves back, returns it down the sideline, runs along the goal line, and cuts in and scores. So he's one of the most iconic punt returns of all time. So he would be in consideration there. But like I said, I would then look at the kick returners. You wouldn't have Devin Hester in there anymore. Cordell Patterson is he's number 1 right now in terms of the most kick returns for a touchdown among active players. So he's an automatic slot, and I know he's right at the top among career kick returns. Obviously he's number 1 active, but he's up there, another former Viking. Now again, another little bit of a biased move here. But Devin Hester has five career kick returns for touchdowns. Percy Harvin has 5 career kick returns for touchdowns. I believe the most all time. I think Cordero has 11 or something like that. I could be wrong. Maybe it's 9. But Cordero Patterson is up there. So is Percy Harvin. Percy Harvin in recent time was among the top in terms of kick returners. It's another thing to mention is that Darren Sproles was one of the players that was selected on the offensive team, and he was selected as the flex player. Now, I think many people would want to make an argument for Percy Harvin. People forget that he ran the ball too, off of jet sweeps, and you throw this guy a screen, you throw him a quick 2-yard hitch. He's dangerous. Yards after the catch. He's one of the greatest to do it in recent time in the 21st century. I think a lot of people would have trouble arguing that, but again, his career got derailed. He got traded to the Jets, and then I believe went to the Seahawks after that, or the other way around. But Percy Harvin is among one of the greatest kick returners of all time. I would personally put him on this list, so I would make it Darren Sproles and Devin Hester as punt returners, and Percy Harvin and Cordero Patterson as kick returners. And I didn't really have any issues with the punters or the kickers. Justin Tucker, one of the most accurate field goal kickers of all time. And then you have Stephen Gostkowski. Now, many people said, hey, what about Adam Vinatieri, right? Former New England Patriot. I believe he has the most points scored in NFL history. So, I mean, this guy was around for a long time, kicking into his mid-40s, still kicking at a high level in the last decade, so mainly with the Colts. I would probably have to swap out him and Stephen Gostkowski, but Gostkowski would be an honorable mention. And then with the punters, you can't really go wrong with Johnny Hecker and Shane Lechler. They're both two of the greatest punters, in recent times. So yeah, I felt that the offensive team was pretty good. Again, let me know if maybe you think that I missed some players that should have been mentioned. That should have been mentioned in that conversation for players that missed out. And yeah, let me know again in the comments. Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever way you get around on social media. Please let me know. Thanks again for tuning into the intermission, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks.